They walked in, said one line, and the studio laughed. Lenny and Squiggy weren't mere supporting characters. Coke-fueled chaos stuffed into leather jackets, pilfering every scene they appeared in. But behind the giggles was a tale that no one's telling. How did two obscure comedians crash their way onto Laverne and Shirley? And why did Penny Marshall and Cindy Williams remain quiet about what actually went down on that set all these years? The reality includes house party editions, 11th-hour rewrites, and moments behind the scenes too crazy to air. This is the true story of the dynamic duo who forever altered the history of sitcoms. Making connections in a living room. Pre-cameras, pre-catchphrases, pre-that iconic hello that rattled the studio walls. Squiggy and Lenny were just two dudes making wisecracks at a party in someone's house. Cindy Williams and Penny Marshall years later still giggled when they recalled that evening. It all began in Penny's living room. No audition, not even close. It was an informal night, friends dropping in for cocktails, the sort of night Penny and her ex-husband, Rob Reiner, were famous for. They always entertained actors, writers, comedians, and that night there were two visitors who made an impression, David Lander and Michael McKean. Penny knew them already from The Credibility Gap, a comedy and musical satirical troupe that had achieved cult status during the 70s. Their sense of timing, humor, and ability to do wicked improv made them the sort of performers you remembered the moment you met them. But that evening, something strange occurred. As the trio talked and giggled, David and Michael out of nowhere switched gears. They turned into Lenny and Squiggy in the living room. That didn't need prodding, Penny afterward declared, smiling at the recollection. They just went into it. One moment, they were themselves. Then they were two goofy, lovable weirdos with over-the-top accents, nervous mannerisms, and an impossible-to-replicate chemistry. The whole room dissolved into laughter. The switch was effortless, spontaneous, and completely unforgettable. Cindy remembered that the characters possessed an energy that dominated the room. They had this rhythm, she said. They'd bounce off each other like they'd been doing it forever. It wasn't only funny, it was charged. Penny noticed that, too. She didn't require a script to realize it was effective. What she observed that evening was raw comedic intuition. How they moved, how they cut each other off, how one pause could send an audience into a frenzy. The timing couldn't have been better. Laverne and Shirley was only just finding its voice. A rambunctious sitcom concerning two best pals of the same social standing striving to make it on their own. The series depended on Penny and Cindy's chemistry. But Penny's brother and producer, Gary Marshall, wanted more. The characters who could burst in, disrupt, and leave the audience gasping. So Penny suggested, "You have to check these two men out." Next day, David and Michael were summoned to the set. No formal tryouts, no boring screening, just a chance to show what they could do. And when they stepped into that soundstage, it was déjà vu all over again. They did not just perform, they took over the room, just as they had done in Penny's living room. All were laughing without a break. They were strange, over the top, but completely sincere in their craziness. It was like catching lightning in a bottle, Cindy said. They always arrived, got their laughs, and departed. That was the pattern every time. The living room routine, an improvisational one at first, was a legend in the annals of TV history. But it wasn't luck. It was a combination of instinct and circumstance. Penny had a very long list of comedians that could make her laugh, but few of them could make the entire crowd go down in the split of a second. It was the same with David and Michael. They shared the same great and unique gift. They did not fake being funny. They were really funny, beginning with their body stance and ending with their way of pronouncing words. Later, Penny would explain, they were supposed to come into a room, say a line, and exit as if the room belonged to them. That was exactly what Lenny and Squiggy became, a brilliant comic flash that could burst onto a scene, make the audience laugh, and be gone before you took a breath. And it began not in a casting notice or a writer's room, but in a busy Los Angeles living room, where two buddies broke into character and altered the history of sitcoms forever. From Anthony to Squiggy when Laverne and Shirley was new and still getting its footing, no one could have imagined that two supporting characters, originally titled Lenny and Anthony, would be TV legends. The strategy was straightforward. introduced two local guys who were more awkward, poorer, and more over the top than Laverne and Shirley. The dynamic was there, the humor was immediate, and viewers couldn't get enough of them. But before the world got to know Lenny and Squiggy, a production choice altered everything about what they were going to be. As Penny Marshall revealed, the initial take on the characters was not to have Squiggy on it whatsoever. Anthony was the character's name, one of the neighborhood Italian guys, and he was to go along with Lenny on what was to be a one-time cameo. It was Lenny and Anthony, Penny said, but there were too many Italians already. She wasn't kidding. Between Phil Foster's Frank DeFazio, Eddie Mecca's Carmine Ragusa, and the whole Italian style that already permeated the show, the producers figured they had something different. So they revamped everything. Anthony was gone, and Andrew Squiggy Squigman took his place. Same comedy team, new persona. And that altered everything about Laverne and Shirley. Squiggy was no longer Italian. It was loosely German or perhaps Eastern European, depending on the episode. The nationality wasn't what was important. It was the pronunciation. The Squiggy name burst off the tongue. It was odd, snappy, and just cartoon enough to get under your skin. It paired just fine alongside Lenny's more straightforward, everyman delivery. That was not merely superficial change. The retitles set the pair free to be larger, more expansive, and much more erratic. Their strangeness had nothing to do with place or ethnicity. It was simply who they were. They were the very flesh and blood of lovable craziness, and it could be sensed by the audience. Penny remembered the name change was just the beginning. After they were Lenny and Squiggy, everything fell into place. The accents, the stance, the bizarre speech cadences, all of it just fell into place. They had their own world, she said. They'd come in, say silly things, have everyone in stitches, and sashay out like they had another place to wreak havoc. Clearly, Lenny was similarly impacted by the artistic reshuffling. Lenny Kosnowski was his real name, and it was designed to be humorous even before he uttered a word. Penny Marshall once cracked a joke that Kosnowski was an expression of "help, there's a hog in my kitchen," a saying which perfectly encapsulated the absurd and lovable atmosphere that the duo had all the while around them. Their names themselves were crafted for comedy, a heavy, long syllable followed by a short, stinging joke. Cindy Williams found the transformation a blessing. Then there were Lenny and Squiggy. It just worked, she stated. The second they walked onto the set, the crowd already knew they were in for some trouble. The names just cracked you up before the characters even got a chance to open their mouths. Same in the back. The change provided authors with greater freedom, too. The characters were no longer bound by their respective stories. Neighbors, co-workers, supporting characters, or interrupting the overall narrative. The duo did not need to be invited for a reason to visit. They could just drop by, crack a well-timed joke, and vanish like blue ghosts. Gary Marshall, known for his tough timing and construction, also knew the genius in it. They come in, get the laugh, and depart, he said. That's money. And that was the amazing part. Through the gamut of go-getting and struggling characters, Lenny and Squiggy were the comic relief valves, the odd buddies everyone tolerated, because they lightened the mood a bit. They were neither profound nor polished. They were simply to be funny, raw, and simple. The minute their pilot shows went on the air, the audience viewers were hooked. Anthony was wiped from memory. Squiggy became every household's name. It was quirky, it was risky, and unforgettable. What was once a harmless casting gaffe turned into one of the smartest creative changes in sitcom history. Because once Lenny and Squiggy came on through the door calling out hello, in that familiar voice, no one cared what they used to be called. Gary's Ladder. Comedy math. When Penny Marshall first introduced David Lander and Michael McKean to Gary Marshall, she knew they were comedy gold, but Gary saw something more. He didn't observe two clowns with good timing. He observed the missing step on his comedy ladder. To Gary, all great sitcoms operated like a social equation. Contrast was needed. Characters on higher steps of the ladder, reaching for something greater, and characters below them, reminding everyone that it could be worse. That was Gary's comedy math, and nobody did the math better. He looked at Laverne and Shirley and saw two working girl types striving to rise above Milwaukee's brewery existence. They were dreamers and strugglers, already humorous and likable. But even lovable losers needed to have someone to look down on, someone louder, funnier, and less put together. That's where Lenny and Squiggy fit in. As Gary said, someone's got to be worse than you. It wasn't a put down, it was architecture. Each straight man required a wild card. For each sentimental scene, there had to be some craziness lurking offstage. Laverne and Shirley were the sentimental core, but Lenny and Squiggy were the pressure relief valves, bursting in at precisely the right moment to blow the tension into orbit. And Gary knew that to violate the rules, they had to do it flawlessly. That's why Lenny and Squiggy appeared briefly, with a twist of knife and a jab of lightning. They were the comedic shockwave, the fellows who'd burst into an argument, utter one ridiculous line, and have people forget that they'd just seen a scene about heartbreak or financial difficulties. They were there simply to keep the beat going. Cindy Williams once said, Gary was like a mathematician when it came to laughs. He knew where to put the joke, how long to make it hang, and when to exit before it was stale. With Lenny and Squiggy, that timing was impeccable. Those watching the show knew full well that whenever the door swung open to admit those two, they would certainly not be missing the laughter. It was a reasonably unusual expectation.